Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 53 of The Murder Project. Glad to be back with you guys and recording a new episode. This week, we got a good one for you. I meant to do this one a couple weeks ago, but forgot about it. And then we had a little delay in time, so we're going to go ahead and do it now. What case am I talking about? This is going to be the story of Vickey White, who was the Assistant Director of Corrections at the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office in Alabama, and how she helped suspected murderer and also multi-felon Casey White escape from jail and go on an 11-day manhunt. There's a lot of information in this one. This is a good one as far as my background is concerned in correction, and as far as Mike's goes. This episode will lead us into a good debrief. So I'm excited to get started and excited to bring you guys a new episode. Strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 53 starts right now. To get this story started, I think that it is important for us to basically lay out the characters for this. And in this story, we have Vickey White, who, as I mentioned, was a assistant director of corrections for the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office in Alabama. And then we have Casey White. And it's pointed out in a lot of different areas that there's no relation to the two. They were not officially married in any sort of way whenever all of this was going on. It's just happens chance that they have the same last name, not from the same areas. And Casey being in this area is only because he was suspected of committing a crime in that area. And so it's kind of weird how all this gets set up, but nonetheless, it is a great story with a pretty traumatic ending, sad ending. I think there's a lot of victims in this case that are, just collateral damage, as things like this usually go, but a very interesting story nonetheless, and one that caught my attention because I have experience in corrections as well as law enforcement. And so just kind of learning the ins and outs of this case and how it all kind of came about and what had to happen exactly for this to take place, it's very interesting to me. And I wanted to really dissect it. I've been looking into it since the incident happened. I wanted to cover this case a couple of weeks ago, but I forgot about it. And then we kind of had an off week. And so really that kind of delays about 3 weeks. But, either way, we're here, we're doing it now. And we should have a pretty good fire debrief as far as this case goes, because Mike and I are experienced in this area, and I have a lot of experience in corrections and policy and procedures in corrections. And I know that this happened in Alabama and I live in Texas, but the policy and procedures may not mirror each other exactly, but I can guarantee you they're going to be probably pretty similar in the way that the jails run and things like that. So this is one of those cases that I wanted to look at and I wanted to dive into. So the way that this all started is we have Casey White, who is just a garbage human being. He has been convicted of multiple felonies. He's been in and out of jail. It is pointed out that he does have some mental illness as far as maybe some reason why he's doing what he's doing, but he also has a pretty checkered past as far as his drug history goes, alcohol abuse, different things like that. So, where we would typically kind of feel bad for someone in a situation who has mental illness, this gentleman, Casey White, did not do a whole lot to help himself out in the way of getting treatment and doing different things, not being on methamphetamines, not drinking alcohol in excess, different things like that. But kind of how this sets up is Casey is in prison. And he is in prison because he had been convicted and sentenced to 75 years for a multitude of things that involved his ex-girlfriend. And this is one of those scenarios that we'll get into later where I find it hard to believe that with a criminal history that this man had, how any woman knowing his criminal history would get involved with him. And Vicky would definitely know what his criminal history is because of her role in law enforcement. We see this kind of happen time and time again, and we will kind of discuss this as the case goes on. So Casey, not a great guy. He's doing a 75-year stint in state prison for Alabama, and he was sentenced for crimes that he committed in 2015. These crimes have been listed as home invasion, carjacking, and felony evading. And so basically the way that I understand this, and the sources that I'm using on this episode are from a pretty extensive CNN article that I read where I kind of picked up a lot of different information, and I'll make sure and attach those two articles in the show notes. But they had a pretty extensive list as far as all of this went. Casey went on a bender, basically drugs, alcohol. He was off of his medication. He ended up assaulting his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. He broke into her home, and I believe he even shot her dog and killed her dog, stole her car, ran, ended up at a truck stop area or rest stop area, tried to carjack a truck driver. That didn't work out. He tried to do several other things. The police caught up with him, and then once the police caught up with him, he had 2 pistols with him, and he said that he was going to commit suicide. He told the deputies that responded that he was on, or was supposed to be on medication, but he was not on medication. He was having kind of a mental crisis, and then he was already kind of known in this area to be someone who used methamphetamines and other substances. So at this time, he was taken into custody without incident or injury. And because of all of these things that are kind of going on, he gets sentenced to 75 years later on down the road. So the initial kind of events of this happened in 2015. Later on, he is convicted of all of these charges, and he's sentenced to 75 years in prison. Now, I'm sure there's probably some more little tidbits here and there of different charges that he had, but those are the main ones. That's kind of those are kind of the big ones as far as this is concerned. Later on, he is going to write to the either DA's office or to the sheriff's office in Lauderdale County. And what he's going to tell them is that he is responsible for an additional crime. And this crime is a little bit more serious than anything that he has been convicted of thus far. This time, he's saying that he has committed a murder that also happened in 2015. In this letter, and later on in communications that he has with detectives from Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office, he says that he is responsible for the murder of Connie Ridgway. Now, Connie Ridgway was originally killed in 2015. Basically, what happened with that is that the police were called to an apartment complex, I believe, and when they went inside, they found a woman lying on the floor, and she had been stabbed multiple times, in which she died. The case basically went cold. They were not able to get any suspects. I did read some information that said that the police did talk to Casey when all of this was going on, but they weren't able to tie him or anybody else that they spoke to the case. And so basically for 5 years, it just sat there, and it was a cold case. So whenever they get the information that Casey is confessing to this crime, they are, I'm sure, excited that this is an opportunity to be able to close this case out, but they got to verify that all the information is true and that Casey is not, making things up, which I know sounds crazy that people would make up that they murdered somebody, but it actually happens. And I'm sure if you guys listen to a lot of different true crime, then you've probably heard it before that people actually do this for other reasons. And I have a theory on this as to why Casey did this, and we'll kind of get into that later or maybe on the debrief. But Casey ends up admitting to this. They kind of check the story. Casey gives them enough information to make the detectives believe that he is the one indeed responsible for this murder. Whatever that information is, he has enough of it, whether he is lying or telling the truth, it doesn't matter, because he is eventually charged with this murder. So the wheels of justice are going to start turning. So in order for Casey to be formally charged with this murder, there has to be a warrant issued for his arrest. He's already in prison. He's going to need to be bench warranted over to the county jail that he's going to be charged in, which means that the sheriff's office has to make arrangements with the prison system to get the inmate back to their jail. That's what the bench warrant is. What will happen is usually a transport officers will go and pick the inmate up from the prison. They will give them the official copy of the bench warrant. Then the transportation deputies will bring back the inmates to the jail. Once he gets back to the county jail, he will be processed, fingerprinted, and actually charged for the crime. Now, as far as the rest of it goes, it could differ as far as states go, but I know that typically in Texas, what we did is that while the inmate was waiting to go to trial, we kept them at the county jail. This is true for the jail that I worked in. But while they're waiting to go to trial, we typically kept them there. If it was a situation where it could have been an extended period of time, I can see where an inmate might have to go back to prison to wait for additional processes to be done, things of that nature. But I do know that in most circumstances, they just hung out at the jail and waited for their court date, or if they were going to take a plea bargain, or they were going to just confess and plead guilty and say, just sentence me and let me go back to prison. And I know a lot of guys that and girls that came back to the jail that I worked at, if they were bench warranted, if the crime was less severe than what they were already there for, it was typical for them just to say, just guilty, someone sentenced me to something, and hopefully the judge will run them consecutive, and it's not going to matter either way, one way or the other, and I can just go back and continue on with my sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ prison system. Casey is brought to the sheriff's office, to the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office in 2020 to be booked in and arraigned for this murder charge. And this is when they believe that the interaction between Casey White and Vickey White happens. And it could have been on a transport. It could have been while he was in the jail. But one way or the other, these two meet each other and they strike up a friendship, I guess, for lack of a better term. And they don't believe that it's anything more than that at this time, that they just came in contact with each other while Casey was at the Lauderdale County Jail. Vicky was a employee of that facility. They came across each other. But the reason why I kind of explained the way that we did is because Casey does not stay in that jail. He ends up leaving and going back to prison to wait for trial or other processes to happen. And so that is kind of the difference that I saw in between this case in Alabama and how we might have done it in Texas. So Casey is sent back to prison. And in this time, nobody really knows anything that's, is going on, that nothing is happening. Casey was in, Casey's out, boom, we're done. Now, talking about Vicky was the assistant director of the jail. So she had from what I understand, pretty top position and what has been said as second in command of the jail. And I don't know if that is a situation where she is right below the sheriff, or maybe there's someone between her and the sheriff, because the way that I looked at it is second in command would be obviously the sheriff of the county is responsible for the jail. So he would be first in command. Second in command, would be where I'm from, a captain. And then below that, you'd have lieutenant, and then sergeants, corporals, lance corporals, and then your regular field guys or ground guys. And so I'm not sure if she was, like, say, in a captain's position as assistant director, or if there was someone above her and then the sheriff. So I know I'm kind of getting in the weeds there, but just kind of explaining the processes, because I want it to be known that she has a very high position in this jail. And She knows that, and she will use that to her advantage later. But some backstory on Vicky is that she had worked for the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office for almost 20 years. And she was in her kind of later 50s. She's getting towards that retirement age. She is a widow. She does not have any children. The way that I understood her kind of her background is that she had been married, she got divorced, she stayed living with her husband or her ex-husband who had Parkinson's disease, and then when he passed away, she was by herself. She went to work. When she got off work, she went home. She had dinner with her mother, who lived right next door to her. She got her dog that she left at her mother's house while she was working. She would take the dog on a walk, and then she would go home, and then she would repeat. And that was basically the way that her mom described her kind of day-to-day activities. There's not a whole lot as far as what any of her hobbies were, or if, she was doing anything else on the side, or side gig, side job, whatever. The thing that I know is that based on the information that I have, she basically kind of was a homebody when she wasn't at work. She didn't go out. There's no mention of her hanging out with people or going out with friends or doing anything like that. And so, the way that I looked at it is maybe this person was a lonely person. Maybe she didn't have a whole lot of friends. Maybe she didn't have a whole lot of intimacy in whatever way you want to look at it in her life. And she was looking for that. Now, before all of this goes down, Vicky informs the sheriff's office that she is going to retire. She has been at the sheriff's office for almost 20 years. I don't know what her previous experience was, or if she had a retirement from a separate job or what have you, but usually in kind of government type jobs, your first tier retirement is at 20 years. So I don't know if she had something else in between based on her age and the years of service she had. She got to the sheriff's office, probably in her mid 30s. So I'm not sure exactly what she did before that, but she said that she was going to retire from the sheriff's office either way. And she had even put in her paperwork stating that she was going to retire. Also, some things that she did leading up to this event is that she sold her home. And from what I understand, she sold it for way below market value. And she had a lot of money available to her. And she kind of had told her coworkers that she was going to move to the beach, that she wanted to get out of there. And with her being in Alabama, the beach isn't that far away as far as if you're going from where she lives, maybe down to like the Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, maybe Perdido Keys, anywhere in that area. And I guess it seemed like something that maybe she would do because it didn't really turn any heads. It didn't do anything like that. People were thinking, oh, hey, Vicky's getting out of here. She's going to retire. She's heading on her way. And while all of this is kind of happening, Casey White has been bench warranted back to the sheriff's office to go to some court proceedings or something like that. The way that I read the information is he'd come back for a court hearing of some kind, but I don't know exactly what that court hearing was. But I do know now Casey is back in the picture, and this is also the same time that Vicky is going to leave the sheriff's office. She's retiring. She's heading to the beach. She's hanging up the cuffs, and she's going to call it a day. On the day that Vickey White helps Casey White escape from jail, this is her last day at work. Everybody there knows that she is on her last day. Her papers are in. We already discussed all that. Everybody knows she's on her way out. She comes in to the booking room or the intake room. She lets the officers know, hey, I'm going to go and take Casey White to a mental evaluation. And then after I drop him off, I'm going to take myself to the doctor because I haven't been really feeling well. And then I've heard that there has been some confusion about was she picking him up after that, or were other deputies supposed to be responsible for picking him up? Because I heard that she told the booking room or intake officers that someone else was going to be picking Casey up from the mental evaluation. And then I kind of heard it two different ways. I know that where I worked at, it would have been procedure for us to stay with the inmate while the mental evaluation was going on. Even if we were not allowed to, say, be in the room, we would still be standing right outside the door. We would be at the facility. We wouldn't drop the person off and then go hang out at the mall for a couple hours and then come back and pick them up, or whatever the case. We would stay at the facility. But we also have to understand that Vicky has a lot of power as far as her rank goes. So I don't think there was a lot of questions as far as what the overall field trip included. I'm sure that she came down, was like, hey, call Casey White down to booking. I'm taking him to a mental evaluation. And the officers that were assigned to that area were probably like, 10-4. They called down to the area he was at. He was escorted down to the booking area. I know that based on video that I've seen, they put him in leg and hand shackles. So, the chains go around the feet, chain up to the hands. They go onto the handcuffs. Sometimes they're referred to as belly chains, shackles, whatever you want to call them. But he is belly chained is what I refer to it as. He's belly chained, and he is led out of the sheriff's office by Vicky, and no one thinks anything different. And as we would later find out, the sheriff's office had a policy and procedure that stated that any high-risk inmate, which this guy would definitely fall under, or violent inmate, would be a 2-officer, 2-deputy inmate. We had similar things. So what should have happened is there should have been another transport officer or deputy or someone there with her to transport Casey to this mental evaluation, but this person is not present. I don't know how busy it was in the booking room when all this was going on, but I can tell you from experience when a lot of people come in and they're saying, hey, I'm, especially transportation officers, because the jail that I worked at, I was in the booking room when I was in the jail for a long time. The majority of the time that I worked there, I knew all the transportation officers. I knew the court security officers. I knew everybody that was in and out. I knew everybody that worked there. I didn't work in a huge facility. And from what I understand, Florence, Alabama, where Lauderdale County is roughly 40,000 people. So I would assume that this would be the same. Everybody there would know everybody. So if I had a deputy that came in that was transporting an inmate and it was a high-risk inmate, usually we'd say something like, oh, hey, where's your partner at? And they might say, oh, it's sitting in the van. They're not getting out of the AC, or, make a joke or make something, they're not getting out, whatever. And we wouldn't think anything of it. And because this is just normal day in, day out things that happen in the jail, things that are constantly occurring inside the booking room. You're going to have inmates coming in and out that are brought in by the police department. You're going to have bonds. You're going to have arraignments. You're going to have all these different things that are happening, people moving about, people going around, a lot of things happening, the phone's ringing, someone wants to know if their friend got locked up last night, all these things. So you just get into a flow. You get into a kind of a groove of how things are going. Someone walks in, says, hey, I need Casey White, taking him to a mental evaluation. You're like, all right, Casey White, come on down. Casey White comes down, boom, belly chains, he's out the door. Now, the problem with this whole scenario is that Casey White does not return. He is in the wind. And also in the wind is Vickey White. And it takes several hours to pass before this is noticed. And this also would be pretty common, because if you have, say, a couple of deputies that check somebody out to go to a mental evaluation, go to court, go to this, go to that, you're not really, as a kind of a booking intake officer, you're not really going to be looking for them. The pod that the inmate is assigned to is going to have that inmate assigned out to, say, medical or to evaluation or something like that. And even if there's a shift change that happens before 5, like our shift change was at, say 2 o'clock, maybe your evening shift, your shift change at 2 o'clock. You say, hey, I got, 48 assigned, 47 present. I got 1 having a mental evaluation, or however they signed him out. And you say, okay, you go count. I got 47 bodies. That checks up. I got 1 missing. Okay, but he's signed out to this area. Boom, we're moving on. and that's it. It's only going to be later when people are starting to think like, man, they've been gone for a long time. Or let's say you're serving chow, right? Dinner time comes around, inmates start serving chow. People realize, man, it's 5-6 o'clock. Where's this guy at? Why is he not back? And wait, who signed him out? Well, the assistant director of the jail signed him out. Okay, well, I mean, Vicky has had a flawless record for almost 20 years. She's worked her way up to almost the top position inside the jail. There's never been an incident where her credibility or her ethics or anything that has come under question, should I say. And this is the first time that something happens where later on people are starting to think to themselves like, maybe something is not right here. And when they start looking into it, they find out that there was never a mental evaluation set up for Casey White that day. And when they realize this, they start to think to themselves that something bad could be happening. Later on, they're going to find Vicky's patrol vehicle that she was driving. What looks like a patrol vehicle to me. It could be an older patrol vehicle that they use for transport. I know we used vans, but this place could use something different. Either way, they find the car not too far from the sheriff's office, and it is abandoned. There's no one inside. When they look inside the vehicle, this is when they're probably going to start noticing that the shackles, the handcuffs, the leg irons, the belly chain, all these things are probably going to be left behind. His inmate clothing is probably going to be left behind because one thing that's super noticeable when you're out in the free world, as they say, is inmate clothing. So all of these things are going to be left behind, and they probably thought to themselves at this point, oh man, Vicky helped Casey White escape from jail. And they would be correct. So at this time, a manhunt ensues for both of them. I know that whenever I was kind of watching this case unfold, originally it was thought that Vicky might have been a victim of Casey White, that he might have taken her hostage, that something might have happened that maybe they didn't know, that she, something crazy happened. I mean, that's the only way that I can explain it, because it's hard for me to get to the point where whenever I heard about the car being found and all the thing, I would be like, man, the only scenario I can think of is that while in transport, somebody was able to contact Vicky, say with a weapon or some other sort of means, and say, pull the vehicle over. Now both of y'all are coming with me. And at the same time, there's going to be no fight. There's going to be no radio communications. There's going to be no nothing. They're just going to be gone. Is that possible? Absolutely, it's possible. But to me, it kind of seemed like in the beginning that it was more of a setup than it was set up this way than it could have been maybe the other way. And as they start getting video information and they kind of start putting some things together, they see the car driving. It's later seen kind of driving in the area of where it's parked. Then they kind of start thinking like, man, Vicky's last day was today. She put in her retirement papers. She sold her house. And then they kind of start doing some digging and checking in the jail, talking to people. And they find out that it is possible that Vicky might have had a relationship going on with Casey before all of this kind of took place. As they kind of start looking into it, they do realize there is some sort of personal relationship between the two. And as they're kind of talking to officers and inmates inside, it kind of starts to come out that Casey was given what they call special privileges and was treated differently while he was in the jail, and treated differently than the other inmates. They said that he was getting extra food on his tray, and he was getting privileges that no one else got. And it doesn't really go on into any further information than that, but I would think that it would have to be pretty minimal privileges, because at the end of the day, it's still going to be, you're still going to be in jail. You're still going to be in a situation where it's going to be hard to give someone a lot of different privileges because you're still in the jail. You're going to have officers do things, or you'll have to have inmates do things for you. Now, I can see the food. that would be kind of an easy way to get, you could make mention to somebody, maybe have them put a little extra food on his tray. You could, as a person in her position, you could go to the kitchen boss, which would be a officer in the jail that runs the kitchen area. And you could say, hey, this inmate over here, he's got certain medical conditions that, he's been evaluated. He has to have a higher calorie intake than the rest of the people. So they said that we have to give him, 2 servings of food instead of 1, whatever. But you couldn't do anything as far as commissary goes, because most jails and prisons, their commissary system is set up by somebody that's in a third party. So third party vendor. So you couldn't walk down and be like, hey, give that inmate 4 Dr. Peppers. Because the commissary person would be like, okay, well, if I just give him 4 Dr. Peppers, then I'm going to be 4 Dr. Peppers short. And I'm not going to have the money for that. So later on, my boss is going to be like, hey, where are my Dr. Peppers at? Why are you short all of this food and drink or whatever? So it's hard for me to see what other kind of privileges he might have had. Maybe he got access to, maybe he had money on his books that no one knew where it came from. Maybe he got extra supplies, writing supplies, letters, anything like that. There's just not, in kind of a smaller county jail setting, there's just not a whole lot you can do that would be considered a privilege that you wouldn't gain through, like, say, a trustee status. Like, maybe you are a trustee in the jail, you get to go do certain jobs, so you get extra privileges because of that. Because of Casey White's classification, he would not be able to do this. He is going to be set at the highest classification you can get. In our jail, it was red. So if you had an inmate who was high risk, then he would be in red and white. If you had an inmate that was medium risk, they would be in black and white. And if you had a inmate that was lower risk, he would be in orange and white. Your inside trustees would be in green and white, and your outside trustees would be in blue and white. And that's how you could kind of distinguish between what was going on with the inmates, what their classification is, without even knowing the person. You could just see them and be like, that is a high-risk inmate, or that is a low-risk inmate. And so based on your classification, you were put in certain pods or locations, and we would kind of keep people in their classifications together, because you wouldn't want somebody in there that wrote a hot check to be with someone who killed somebody, and to be able to get into a trustee situation, you had to have, for the most part, you had to have a low classification, because they didn't need guys like Casey White in a situation where he was a trustee or where he had access to places that other inmates could go and make it easier for him to escape. Either way, what we have here is we have a situation where Casey and Vicky are gone, and they know now at this point in time in this story that I'm telling you guys, they know now that it is probably because they left the jail together, that there was a relationship that was formed, and Vicky has helped Casey escape from jail, and they got to figure out how to get him back. So they know, obviously, that Vicky is going to have firearms available to her, not only the ones she carries, but the ones that she has at home. The sheriff in Lauderdale County said that she had 2 pistols that he knew about, an AR-15 and a shotgun. So while you're investigating this crime, you're going to go ahead and assume that she has all of those, and now Casey has all of those. Casey already has a history of a violent past, and he's currently awaiting trial for murder. So all the red flags, all the bells, everything's going off. This is top priority. This is going to be a situation where all hands are on deck, presumed to be armed and dangerous and all the things that you hear, and they got to get out of Dodge. I mean, that's what you think to yourself. Like, they're gone. After they go through and start looking into some of Vicky's personal items, because I would assume that in a situation like this, you're not going to have just a whole lot of trouble with the judge signing whatever warrants that you put down in front of them related to this case. So I'm sure they searched all of his things. I'm sure they searched all of her things. With her selling her house, I don't know if she had anything in her mother's house, where she was staying at, what her living arrangements were, any of that. But I can guarantee you, whatever it was, they were all up in it. They were there. They went through everything, and they found out that Vicky had actually purchased a 2007 Ford Edge. It's like a smaller compact SUV. And not to mention, but it was that rust color, it's kind of the orangey color, but she had done so under a alias. So she did not use her real name whenever she purchased this vehicle. Now, if there was any question before, there's not any question now. They know that Vicky and Casey are on the run, and they are together, because after they figured out that she had purchased this vehicle, they also saw the vehicle leaving the area that the patrol car was dumped, and now they need to find these two. Now, remember when this originally happened, and this is just a couple weeks ago, but I remember when this originally happened, I looked at their original location, and I thought to myself, they have to be heading maybe for the southern border, maybe Mexico, maybe somewhere that they can cross over, because you have to think to yourself that they're not going to be able to get extremely far based on Vicky's position in law enforcement and based on Casey's criminal history, because, as I mentioned, this is going to be all hands on deck. This is and was a national news story. It was being broadcasted all over the place. They're going to know that this is going to happen. So they have to, in the beginning, get as far away as they can, as quickly as they can. But we're going to find out later that that's not exactly the kind of luck that they had, because I've read a lot of information about this kind of being a mastermind situation, that, you know, the way that this all played out and the way that it was done, I got to tell you, it's good. It is a good, the way that Vicky used her position in the jail to get this inmate out was a good plan. Now, after that, it either all goes south, something doesn't happen that was supposed to, or whatever the case, but it seems to me more like it was kind of just up in the air after that. A little over a week later, and it's unfortunate because her vehicle, this Ford Edge, was found in Williamson County, Tennessee, which is Franklin, Tennessee, the town. And that's only about 2 hours or 105 miles north of where they left from Florence, Alabama. And so they realized that this vehicle was dumped in a location or not long after the escape happened. And the vehicle basically was called in, and it sat in an impound yard. And then somebody realized later on, oh man, I think this is the vehicle. They call the cops. They figure out, yeah, that is the vehicle. So it looks like to me, whenever this all kind of started to unfold, I thought, okay, well, maybe this was one of many vehicles, and they used this. They got a couple hours away. They dumped the vehicle in, Franklin, Tennessee. It's about half an hour from Nashville. And they had another vehicle there, and they're gone. They're changing vehicles so that you can't figure out where they're going. And now that we're over a week in, they're gone. And they're in the wind. There's no way we're going to find them now. They have to be a good distance from where they started at. They had the vehicle. They dumped the cop car. They dumped the getaway vehicle. Now, nobody knows what vehicle they're in. It's over a week later. They are gone. Not so much. That's not so much what happened. And that's why I think that everything fell apart, because what they think is that used car that Vicky bought, probably broke down. Then it looks like at some point they had tried to disguise the vehicle and spray paint it. And they started on the back quarter panel of the vehicle, and then about a foot high and maybe a foot and a half wide, they gave up. They're like, this is taking too long, or this looks stupid, or whatever, because the getaway vehicle, besides being yellow, was the most obvious color you could have that just stuck out like a sore thumb. Not because it was super bright, but because the color is ugly. And you're like, man, that color's ugly. And then They're like, man, is that a '07 Ford Edge? Boom, got him. But it appears that the vehicle broke down, and so they had to abandon the vehicle. Well, then that gets them thinking, well, maybe they're in close proximity to here, because if this happened and they didn't have a secondary plan, then they might still be trying to figure out how to get all of this going, how to continue it. But that did kind of throw a wrench in my theory from the beginning, because I thought, no way they would go north. They had to have been going south. But now we know that they're going north. That also could have been a decoy tactic. They could have drove 2 hours north, ditched the vehicle, and then went south. We don't know any of that information at this time. A few days later, they are going to be spotted about 2 additional hours from where they are, north, in Evansville, Indiana. This is about 200-ish miles, 2 hours and 40-minute drive from Franklin, Tennessee. These two are spotted at a hotel. And when they are spotted at this hotel, they're later seen at, I believe, a car wash. It looks like maybe Casey is driving a truck. Later on, when they're at the hotel, they're spotted in a Cadillac sedan. Now, they don't know where this vehicle came from at the time, but they do know that these are the people. They recognize Vicky and Casey. If I didn't mention, he's 6'9" and over 300 pounds. It's a pretty noticeable dude. So they see these two at the hotel. They're like, we got him. They leave the hotel. They get in the Cadillac. They start driving, and the police try to knock them down. They take off. A pursuit is started, and not long after the pursuit starts, Vicky, who is said to have been driving the vehicle, crashes into a ditch. The car rolls over on to its side, and the pursuit is over. The vehicle is surrounded, and after the vehicles are surrounded, they hear a gunshot. After the gunshot, Casey exits the vehicle, and he's like, oh, man, I think she shot herself. I didn't do it. Is my wife okay? Oh, man, y'all need to get in there. Y'all need to help her. Now, I did watch the body cam video from the police on this actual situation, and the police are very cautious whenever they are approaching the vehicle. They do call out that Vicky is in the vehicle. It looks like she has a wound to her head, and they notice that there is a pistol in her hand. After they make sure that the scene is safe, they get the weapon out of her hand. They actually remove her from the vehicle, and you can see all of this on the body cam. And she is loaded into an ambulance. She's taken to a hospital, and a few hours after she gets to the hospital, she dies. And while I'm watching this police body cam, I did notice that the police officer said she is breathing. She's not conscious, but she is breathing. And so that was one of those situations where I thought to myself, like, maybe she made it. And this is before they had released the fact that she had died, that she had been shot in the head. And I thought maybe she made it. You read a little bit further down the article and you're like, no, she didn't make it. And what do we have here? We have a employee of a sheriff's office that was looked upon by her fellow employees as a good person, a good supervisor, well-rounded, did her job, climbed the chain, got a good position. She gets crossways from this dude. At the end of the story, she's dead, and he is going to go back to prison. And it's not going to be probably for any longer than he's already going to be in jail, unless maybe he's convicted of the other crime and sentenced to death. But he had nothing to lose. She had everything to lose. And she lost everything, including her life. Now, she was a willing participant in all of this. And that's not what I'm going to that's not what I'm saying. I am just saying that when you look at it from the perspective of who had something to gain and who had something to lose, Casey White had everything to gain and Vickey White had everything to lose. And she did. And there's a lot more details in this that I want to get into, and I want to talk about some kind of theories that I have as far as Casey White and him kind of admitting to this murder so many years later, about the vehicle, the escape, the motels that they stayed at, the fact that they only ended up about 4.5 hours away from where they really started. And this is over the course of 11 days. They were on the run for 11 days, and they only ended up 4.5 hours away from where they started. And so I kind of want to get into that. I want to talk about that, maybe some theories that I have as far as all this goes. And I can't wait to do that on the debrief. I know that Mike and I have already talked about this case numerous times because it is intriguing to me the way that it all went down and the kind of the way that things were carried out, and then ultimately the ending, because in my opinion, it is one way or the other, it's a sad ending. And I'm just glad that Casey White's back in jail where he should be. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, there was some collateral damage in the process. A lot of collateral damage. So I will leave it here for this episode. But I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week on the debrief. Mike will be back with me, and we will break this case down. So I will talk to you guys next week. We'll see you later. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. Our numbers are going up, our downloads are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. If you're looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook. We're at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, you can type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on Instagram, we are at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on Twitter, we are at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget, go over to whatever platform you're listening on, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if they have it. If you're listening on Spotify, tap that 5 stars. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars. We appreciate everybody that has done that. You are helping us out so much, and it doesn't cost anybody a dime. We just need your help in getting the word out, and the best way to do that is with 5 stars and reviews. Thank you guys so much who have already done that. If you have a longer form question or comment, you need to reach out to us. We have an email address. That email is contact@themurderproject.com. And as always, Mike or myself will get back to you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode. I look forward to speaking to you in the future. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up, and stay alive.